We've all seen it on TV. A character is hit in the head, they forget everything, they're hit in the head again, and they remember everything. Unfortunately, head injuries don't work that way in the real world. Head injuries are traumatic and can cause serious learning difficulties in our students. My name is Courtney Rummel, and today I'm going to take a look at head injuries, impact in New Zealand classrooms. What are head injuries? Head injuries occur when the head is shaken or hit in such a way that causes the brain to bounce against the skull, as seen in the image above. This can damage the brain, causing traumatic brain injury. The impact of head injuries differs in the long term and the short term. In the short term, people diagnosed with TBI have symptoms like amnesia, confusion, disorientation, and neurological abnormalities. In the long term, the effects of TBI are far-reaching. TBI can have a lasting impact on a person's cognitive function. Later in this presentation, we will be taking a close look at how TBI can have an impact on vision, memory, and behavior. Are head injuries an issue for students in New Zealand? Traumatic brain injuries only impact 790 out of every 100,000 New Zealanders. The distribution of TBI differs by age, gender, ethnicity, and location. But as TBI primarily impacts youth, teachers need to be aware of the impact that TBI can have on our students. We can see in the chart below that 70% of those impacted by TBI are children and young adults, whereas only 30% of TBI sufferers are adults or the elderly. The distribution of TBI varies by gender, ethnicity, and location. The majority of TBI sufferers are male, with 63% of those affected by TBI in New Zealand being male, and only 37% being female. In terms of ethnicity, the most impacted ethnicity are Europeans, with 61%, followed by Maori, with 31%. Smaller percentages of Pacifica, Asian, and other ethnicities are also impacted by TBI. We can also see that TBI greatly impacts those in urban areas, with 74% of New Zealand TBI sufferers living in urban regions and only 26% in non-urban regions. What are the causes of TBI? The main causes of TBI are vehicle accidents, falls, exposure to mechanical force, being struck by a person accidentally, for example, and assault. TBI in the very young is most frequently caused by car accidents and falls. As our students age, it is more likely that their TBI will be caused by mechanical force or assault. Transport accidents are the #1 leading cause of TBI, although it is more likely for those under 4 years old to have TBI as the result of a fall. As students age, it is more likely that their TBI will be caused by exposure to mechanical force, which includes sports injuries. Assault is also a leading cause of traumatic brain injury. How can head injury impact student achievement, and how can it present in the classroom? We know that head injuries can have a huge impact on the way people live their lives. So what does that mean in a school environment? I found this quote, which I think really sums up the medical professionals' opinions on how schools are to deal with brain injuries. Schools are also the environment where students with brain injuries begin to more fully experience challenges in learning, cognition, language, academics, and behavioral skills, social, emotional, associated with their brain injuries. School-age children, unlike adults, are still developing neurobeings, and as they grow older, their lives become more complex. E.g., incremental learning in school is harder and more complicated grade after grade. Social development and peer relationships become increasingly more mature year after year, and emotional growth and independence are paramount for quality of life. All these learning and behavioral variables in normal development are complicated enough without imposing any disruption to a child's neurodevelopment from a significant brain injury. We need to look at brain injuries holistically and see all of the impacts that they can have on our students, because it really can be a huge challenge for students to deal with. How can head injuries impact student cognition? Chronic TBI can have a wide range of effects on cognition. Verbal memory, working memory, cognitive processing speeds, and attention are all impacted by TBI. Although effects of TBI usually improve 1 to 2 years after the head injury, some of the cognitive effects will be long-term, particularly if the TBI is sustained while the brain is still developing. We need to remember that our students' brains are still developing, and any TBI can have lasting impact to their learning. Students living with the effects of TBI can struggle to learn new things at the same speed as their peers, and this can often cause them to fall behind in their learning. This phenomenon is known as neurocognitive stall. High-achieving students and low-achieving students with TBI may both fall far behind their peers, as depicted in the graphs on the following slide. It is clear that TBI can have a huge impact on student achievement, and schools need to be aware of these students' specific learning needs to help them achieve their best. On these two graphs, we can see two case studies of actual children who have sustained traumatic brain injuries. On the left, we have Angelique, who was achieving above average for students in her age group until she had a TBI, at which point her performance dropped considerably, much below where she should have been. And after recovery, we can see that her achievement never got back to the same level. On the other hand, we have Mawan. Mawan was achieving slightly below, but when he had his TBI. Then we can see during the recovery stage, his performance dropped and never again went back to normal after his recovery ended. We can see that no matter who the student is, if they sustain chronic TBI, there is a chance that they will never be able to achieve where they did before the TBI. This is important for teachers to remember. How can head injuries impact student vision? Head injuries can cause a person many difficulties. As a person is treated for head injuries, associated vision problems are often overlooked, and when vision is checked, overall visual function is often ignored. Patients with TBI often suffer from double vision, which causes decreased motor function. Vision can become very distorted for some patients, and some even experience hallucinations. Some TBI sufferers become overwhelmed by stimuli in their peripheral vision and become unable to focus. In the classroom, left undiagnosed, visual problems could add further difficulties to student learning. Students may become overwhelmed by visual stimuli in the classroom or may lose their ability to focus on texts. Padula and Shapiro identify teachers as being main players in identifying visual problems after a head injury. I found this quote by a TBI sufferer explaining what the vision problems were like. He described it as a world that visually makes no sense. It constantly changes, but I will not be fooled. I know that it cannot be this way, even though there is no order to things. Can you imagine being a student in the classroom and not knowing what's what and still having to learn? These visual problems could have a huge impact on learning for students with TBI. How can head injuries impact student behavior? A person who sustains chronic TBI will be going through a difficult time in their life, as the way their brain works has fundamentally changed. If cognitive processing and visual changes were not enough, TBI can also result in limited insight, poor social cognition, a loss of cognitive flexibility, changeable moods, impulsivity, low tolerance, irritability, and poor temper control. These behavioral changes are frequently ignored in treatment, and many TBI sufferers fail to learn healthy coping mechanisms to help them deal with these issues. When trying to manage a classroom filled with different students, it can be easy to forget that some behavioral difficulties may have a neurological source. Students with TBI who are acting out in the classroom may still be adjusting to life with TBI and may not have been taught the self-management skills that are necessary when having TBI. It is important that as teachers we are understanding of these students' learning needs and that we are able to identify when students may need outside help. So what can we do? What strategies can we use in the classroom to help students with TBI? First of all, I think it's really important that we know the signs of TBI and that we can help prevent it, because as teachers, we are the first line of defense against TBI at school. We may be watching while students hit their head while playing sport, or hear rumors that a student was knocked out during a fight. I believe that all teachers need to be first aid trained to deal with head injuries. According to St. John, a head injury may be serious if the person exhibits an altered conscious state, often deteriorating over time, blurred or double vision, a thumping or pounding headache, nausea or vomiting, loss of balance and coordination, altered sensation in the fingers or down one side of the body, loss of short-term memory, such as recent events, noisy breathing, leaking fluid from the nose or one ear, or a history of a blow to the head, because consecutive brain injuries get worse and worse. If a person shows these symptoms, 111 must be called. The person should be monitored and their body heat should be maintained until help arrives. We need to do everything we can to help prevent the traumatic brain injury from happening and to help lessen the impact. So as a teacher, what is my role in identifying symptoms of TBI? Every person with TBI will have different symptoms. Although medical professionals are responsible for post-injury care, as teachers with more long-term knowledge of our students, we hold a certain responsibility for identifying learning needs that result from TBI. If we know that a student has sustained TBI, we should be on the lookout for impaired cognitive function, such as memory loss, reduced cognitive processing skills, and attention issues. We should also be aware that students with these symptoms may be suffering from undiagnosed TBI if no incidence of head injury has been reported. Teachers should also be aware of changes in vision and behavior, as these may be symptoms of TBI. As soon as any TBI symptoms have been identified, teachers should speak with their team to develop a plan for the student. Finally, it is important to remember that assault is a leading cause of TBI for young adults. If TBI is suspected to be caused by assault, the teacher should discuss this with school counselors to make sure that the student is safe. And again, brain injuries get worse the more that a person has them, so if they're not in a safe position and they continue sustaining traumatic brain injuries, their condition can get worse and worse. What options are there for students who have vision difficulties? If a teacher suspects visual impairment in students who have sustained TBI, the student should be referred to a vision professional. These professionals can help provide prism glasses and vision therapy to these students. As vision therapy can take time, teachers need to be aware of the student's visual needs and may want to work together with a vision professional to come up with strategies to help the student better cope with their visual impairments. What behavior management strategies exist for students with TBI? If a teacher notices behavioral problems in a student with TBI, they should speak with a school counselor to develop a plan. Research has shown operant conditioning to be a powerful tool for managing the behavior of TBI sufferers. In a classroom setting, teachers should consider using traditional operant conditioning techniques when dealing with students with TBI. This includes punishments for bad behavior and rewards for good behavior. These techniques have proved to be highly successful in modifying the behavior of TBI sufferers. While operant conditioning may not be the most popular method of behavior management, it really can help those with TBI. So, how can we use professional readings to help students with TBI? As teachers, we can use professional research to help us improve learning outcomes for students with cognitive impairments due to TBI. I have identified 3 research-based strategies to help these students. The following strategies have been shown to improve academic performance in students with TBI and can be used by teachers to improve student learning outcomes. Strategy number 1. With TBI-impacted students, it is important to put extra focus on initial learning acquisition. Those with TBI struggle with encoding new information, so as teachers, we may want to provide more activities in the initial stages of the learning process for students with TBI. We also may want to check that they've learned things after they've been given some initial instruction, which brings us to number 2. Students with TBI also struggle with metamemory and metacognition and have trouble identifying their own learning needs. It may be important for their teachers to provide extra assessment for these students to make sure that they are progressing in their learning. While it's great to get learners' feedback on their own learning, this may not be the best strategy with TBI sufferers. It may be more important for the teacher to take a look at how the student is progressing. Finally, there has also been success with the use of GIST reasoning strategies in students with TBI. GIST reasoning has students work towards focusing on main concepts as opposed to small details. So looking at the big picture may be really important for TBI sufferers. And again, we know that even visually, they can be distracted by small details, so it may be a good idea to have them focusing on big concepts, big images, etc. Head injuries can have a complex array of effects on our students. If a teacher suspects that a traumatic brain injury may be causing cognitive, visual, or behavioral problems in a student, it is important for that teacher to research strategies to help that student achieve. Students with TBI tend to fall behind in their learning. As teachers, it is our responsibility to provide these students with the best education possible by identifying their individual learning needs and formulating an evidence-based approach that will help the student achieve their best. In researching head injuries, I came up with some important questions to consider, and these are all questions that I think deserve further research. First of all, to what extent do medical professionals hold teachers responsible for identifying the impact of TBI on students? I got the implication that medical professionals really rely on teacher feedback when it comes to diagnosing the impact of the student's TBI, but I wonder if teachers know about that at all or have even been taught about TBI in traditional teacher trainings. Next, at what point should the parents of TBI sufferers consider enrolling their students in special education programs? It seems to me that the learning required by TBI sufferers can sometimes be very different from the learning required in a standard classroom. For example, TBI sufferers may need to focus more on actually just obtaining initial content knowledge before moving on to thinking about things in a more critical way. And I wonder if a traditional classroom setting here in New Zealand is what's best for some of these TBI sufferers. Of course, some people with TBI have very mild side effects, but at some point students are going to need to consider special education programs. Finally, at what frequency do our students with learning difficulties suffer from undiagnosed TBI? Before conducting this research, I did not know about all of the wide array of impacts that TBI had on learning, behavior, vision, etc. And it seems like some of the students I've had in the past could have had undiagnosed TBI. Of course, it's not for me to say as a student teacher, but I wonder how often teachers consider TBI as opposed to more traditional learning difficulties like ADHD and autism when they're trying to figure out why a student's having trouble in school. I think all of these questions are worthy of research, and it might be something I would look into in the future, but I also welcome anyone to take a look at these questions. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation about traumatic brain injury. I think it's something really important for teachers to learn about and discuss. I've read a lot of really interesting sources looking into TBI and rehabilitation in general, and I would really recommend anyone who's interested in TBI to take a look at the May 2011 edition of the Journal of Head Trauma Rehabilitation, which focuses specifically on this issue. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.